Welcome back to Minor Things, a podcast where we explore corporate and everyday matters through the lens of three Asian Canadians. As always, these are the views of these three Asian Canadians because we don't speak for others. I'd like to introduce myself again. My name is Kim, and I'm a new mom on edge and on maternity leave.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a mom boss and an expert at closing deals, changing diapers, and dealing with toddler tantrums.
And I'm Max. I'm a CPA with a passion for community service.
In this episode of Minor Things, we want to understand how our birth order influences how we perform at our corporate jobs, as well as how we define success during and after office hours. I am an only child, but I'm excited to lead this conversation with Kim and Maria, as they are both firstborn children with one younger sibling. And we want to talk about topics of personal happiness, measures of success, perceptions of mental health, and how their family relationships evolved over the years that they were siblings, and what that looks like today. So, Kim, for you, I'm curious to know, how has your family shaped your definition of success growing up?
You had noted I am from a family of two. So I'm the oldest sibling, and I have a younger sibling who's a sister. I would say that growing up in an typical immigrant family, that our measure of success has always been to get good grades, get into a good post-secondary institution, get a job, be self-sufficient, make a lot of money, and don't bother mom and dad with your financial problems down the line. So I think that measure of success for me growing up has always kind of been a given. I never questioned it, actually. Quite frankly, I saw my parents work multiple jobs and shifts from graveyard to early morning to middle of the day. And I just knew that it was my responsibility to do better. And that was repeated to me probably on a regular basis, even until now, when my parents are just starting to recognize that I'm going to be okay. So that measure of success, I don't think, is unique to a lot of immigrant families. Personally, I took it at face value and I never really questioned it.
When did you come around to realize the impressions that your parents had left on you? And more importantly, do you think both siblings would feel the same way?
I remember having a job interview when I was in second year at TD Canada Trust, and I relayed a lot of my parents' teaching and sacrifice into my interview answers because that's what I believed to be true. The question was, how do you measure success? How do you think you would be a good candidate in this role? And how do you think you're going to give your all? And at the time, I answered that my parents have done so many things for me to get to this country, to give me good education, and I want to be able to show the results, like the fruit of their labors, through getting a good job and for performing for my employer, and to know that I'm the best asset that I can be wherever I'm placed. And that has always been the ideology for me in anything that I do. I would also say that this holds true for my sibling as well. Definitely, we grew up in the same household. We were taught the same values. I think that I put making money and being self-sufficient over self-happiness, if that makes any sense. And I think that my sibling, not just her alone, but I think her generation had the luxury, if I can say that word, of putting themselves first before these quote unquote basic needs.
Definitely, because their generation didn't have to worry about money as much, right?
I don't disagree, but why do you think that's the case?
Well, so I come from a very similar background as you, Kim. I'm the eldest. My younger sister is 5 years younger than me. When my family immigrated, I was just 4 years old, and we came from a middle class, and now we're an immigrant family to a new country, and we basically are at the bottom of the totem pole, right? So in my years of growing up, before my sister was born, we were really poor compared to the standards. And growing up through that time frame, you get to really appreciate work ethic, money, value of money, right? And how you spend it. And once my sister was born 5 years later, we were in a different financial situation. So my parents were able to afford different things for her and me when, I didn't get that at the very get-go when we first just immigrated to a new country.
Now, I was specifically having a memory of being able to have apples whenever I wanted, because there was a point in time where that was not available. And
Exactly, right?
Wow.
I mean, it was just because, like Fuji apples are expensive. And
Hell yeah.
and I think there was a moment in time where mom would cut them up and serve them, and they would always be on the table. And growing up, I never thought that we were poor. I never thought that we were living in any capacity of poverty. That may be the nativity in me, or maybe my parents did a very good job of making sure that we didn't feel this way. But looking back on it now, I randomly, I don't know why, was looking up the elementary school that I went to, and it said that it was the largest inner city school in Vancouver. And I was like, wait, I went to an inner city school? What are you talking about?
Exactly. And you don't realize it when you're a student because you thought this is your way of life. This is what it is. And but lo and behold, I think this generation is having the luxury of looking back and saying, okay, this is what I experienced. This is not the norm. And I think there's, I'm curious to know, what are the points in your careers where you realized maybe your upbringing was a bit different? Maybe it wasn't, maybe your Christmases were probably maybe less happy than someone else's Christmases. Did you guys ever experience that?
I would feel the opposite, to be honest, Max. Like, I would think that without all that materiality items that we would have got a lot easier if we weren't in that situation. I think we appreciate being in the moment a lot more with our families, and it actually makes the situation a lot happier. Because, for example, similar to your story, Kim, I remember getting my first Barbie doll when I was like, 8 years old. And it was like the best thing ever. And then the next year, my sister, who was just like 3 years old, also got a Barbie doll. And I was like, how is that fair? I waited 8 years to get my first Barbie doll. She just only got it because I got it the previous year.
That's probably not fair.
Are we talking about Christmases growing up, or like in recent times now that we're adults and working?
It's more, did you ever realize, because both of you guys are from immigrant households, that your way of life was different from other people's way of life? Because like you, Kim, I grew up in an inner city school as well for 10 years. And I didn't realize nor connected with all the things that my parents were talking about, this school is not as good as it looks on paper. And this school doesn't have the greatest academic graduation rates. When I was in those schools, I didn't feel any different. And so, but it was only after I had stepped out of that environment, then I came to realize, oh, those schools were underserved. They lacked the privilege that some of the other schools had. And I remember a few years ago, I was just driving through Bridle Path and I saw one of the schools there, and they had MacBooks in their school libraries, at like 30 MacBooks. And we were sharing 15 Macintosh computers back in the 2000s for the whole entire school. So there was such a stark difference, and who knows how much of an impact it would have had on different families and different lives, just by the fact that they were under resourced.
I don't think I recognized the underprivilegedness until university. I grew up in a town, or I guess a township, 45 minutes outside of Vancouver proper. The first couple of years of elementary school, we were still living in East Vancouver, but then my parents moved. I went to university at a UBC in Vancouver, and that's when I met students from all walks of life, from West Side to East Side, from outside of Vancouver, private schools, you name it. And they were just sharing their experiences like normal through conversations over lunch and whatnot. And I learned that some students had a school bus that took them to all of their soccer meets or track meets and whatnot. Whereas there were times when it was normal for us to just take the bus to go to the next school for a track meet or a soccer meet, or that it was really up to the students to plan their own grad activities instead of having a reserve where the parents in the school, for a certain extent, would be able to fund a dry grad or whatnot. And I was kind of surprised because those weren't the small privileges that I had at my school. And then I started thinking, did I grow up poor? But you know what? Like, I think that had built-in humility for me because I didn't know any better. I was like, I thought that was just the way of life. And I think that has bled through a lot of the way that I perceive happiness, and that nothing that I have today was given to me, because it was always out of sheer brute force on my end to get what I want. And I would say, like, now for my son, I wouldn't even think twice about buying him a toy or getting him some sort of material good, because I had to think about dinner, which I think now in retrospect my mom probably had to think about that. It was either like new jeans or protein for the week, right? Which is not anything that I would have ever thought about today.
I think I feel the same way. In retrospect, I also grew up the same way as you, Kim. I took the local bus to get to high school for many years, and it would take almost like an hour, over an hour, door to door. And when my sister went to the same high school, she got the privilege to be dropped off by my parents at that time because they were in a, better position to do that for her, but not for me 5 years before she went to that school, right? So I think as the different generations go by, they just get, more access to things, more easier availability to what they need at that time. And obviously generational wealth grows too over time. So it just, in comparison, it feels unfair, but when you are in the moment you don't think otherwise because you're in the same situation as other people. So again, similar to yourself, Kim, I didn't feel poor growing up. Our family was always still doing things. My mom always had dinner on the table, at least 3 dishes and a soup. Even if the dishes are like cabbage made 10 different ways every week, it didn't
Classic.
matter.
Amen.
There was still food on the table, right? But now, we're in a different financial situation. And I also maybe need to scale back a little bit when it comes to raising my son and not making him feel entitled because we are in a better financial position too. I definitely shouldn't be buying him toys because I can buy him toys.
That's right. And maybe this is a question you would take back to your families, but what do you think your parents learned by having after their first child, which is yourselves? Do you think they learned, or do you think they themselves had reflection points that caused them to perhaps treat your second sibling better, or was it just purely the passage of time that allowed your second sibling to have more freedom or money or whatever it is?
Hard to say. I think my sister maybe feels the same way about how she's raised and her perception of our parents similar to me. I don't think we were raised any differently because of the age gap. I think, the main difference is that she was able to do a lot more things easier with my parents' consent because I paved the path for her to do that already. Like my parents were already used to having requests to go to a sleepover, having requests to stay after school or do this event and that, um, because I paved that path for her so that when she was in a position to ask for those things, it wasn't unnormal. So I don't know. I just feel like maybe they just get it a little bit easier because of passage of time.
Mm-hmm. Kim, what about you?
I think that for my own family, my parents have not recognized the impact of how they raised us until quite recently, actually, into adulthood. When they were raising me, we were all, the three of us were immigrants to Canada. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment, and my dad was working. My mom was like part-time working while looking after me because I was this like toddler running around. And by the time that my sister was born, I think we were able to afford like a smaller unit with 2 bedrooms. So it wasn't as terrible as like a rundown 1 bedroom apartment. But I would say that they still were raising us in the same way, in the sense that there wasn't any reflection as to, oh, we did this with Kim, and so therefore we should not do this with the second one. I don't think there was time for reflection, to be honest, working 2-3 jobs per person and then coming home and rinse and repeating. I think it's in recent times, now that we're both adults and living our own lives, that my parents have done a lot of reflection as grandparents. Because
Right.
I mean, this is not a call for child protective services, but I was beaten loads as a kid, rightfully or wrongfully, you know? And I think I was joking around with my parents saying, when my son grows up a little bit more and he gets out of line, that, you know, he's gonna get it. They're like, no, you should not beat your children. It is very wrong. What? Because I remember that broom quite vividly.
It was the slippers for me. And the pinch right here. That
Oh.
hurts.
I don't think I ever got the pinch, but the worst object was probably like one of those old school landline phones that felt like it was made out of bricks. The young listeners won't know what that is, but
No.
But anyways, my point is, I believe that we were raised in terms of like what was going on in my parents' head was still the same values. Must get good grades, must get into a good school, get a good job, make money, get married off, da 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 da. Right now, how did we both perceive it is our own journeys. So I won't speak to that. For myself, though, as much as I sometimes did not agree with how they disciplined me and why I got the beatings that I got, I still agreed that success is what they defined to be, because that's all I knew and that's what I saw. I would say that with my sibling, there was more room to think about one's personal mental health. And I didn't have the luxury of that, because I think subconsciously I was also acting as a third parent, wanting to protect her, rightfully or wrongfully, from what I thought mom and dad was doing wrong. So now that I'm a little bit older and I have my own family, I have more time to reflect. I didn't think I gave myself any room to really think about what happiness means to me, because I've been on this full charged pace for so long. Does money make me happy? Does having a nice house make me happy? What does happiness mean to me? And I'm just thinking about that now. I don't know how you feel about that, Max and Maria, but I think that in general, the younger generation who may not have seen their parents come home, change, shower, and then go on to another job think the same way that we do. And in some ways, I think that it was nice for the older siblings to have shielded them from that. But now we're kind of doing that through our own therapy after the fact.
Yeah, so from what I'm hearing is your parents' definition of success for you was pretty black and white. It was laid out in milestones, which you had to achieve as you grew up. But as our siblings were born, that definition of success was either redefined or it was a little bit more fluid, so they had the opportunity to redefine their version of success. And our parents weren't forcing it on them, which probably relieved less pressure for them to achieve certain milestones and really be successful in their eyes, right?
I mean, Max, let's talk about you for a moment here. You grew up as an only child, and we know that you came to Canada as a young child when you were 5. But anything about your upbringing that may differ from what we're talking about now, or is the same?
And do you wish you had a sibling?
Yeah, and that too.
You don't know what you don't have is my thought on this. So I have some great vivid memories of me being alone now looking back, where I was like, hey, if I had a sibling, that would have been terrific. Like I remember my mom being at work, my dad going to job interviews, and I'd be like 5 years old and I'd be playing Lego for hours by myself waiting for them to come home. You know, there's moments of that where you do a lot of time, you have a lot of time speaking to yourself in your head. You have a lot of thoughts. You do a lot of, self activities because you don't have a sibling. But what I appreciate about your stories is both of yourselves is at a very young age, you had to exhibit leadership in the household, right? By default of being the older sibling, you were the leader. It was a gift given to you through your birth order, and it allowed you paved the way for other people, but you also had to look at your younger sibling and take responsibility and take ownership and provide some guidance where you could, as much like sort of our jobs today. But, growing up, I realized that there were sort of three stages of families in the immigrant life cycle. You have the surviving ones, you have the ones that are floating, and you have the ones that are thriving. And for me growing up, we were mostly in the surviving stage. My parents took a very different route on how they wanted to establish their careers. And as a result of that, there was income instability. And we had to sort of change our family life to adapt to the fact that we were not as well off. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but a lot of my family time was spent at the grocery store. That was the family trip each week where we were all together because my parents would be working different hours that wouldn't overlap with each other. That was my favorite place of time in the week because that I get to spend it with both my parents, even though it was not just pure rest and relaxation as it should be. So, but yeah, no, I would have definitely appreciated a sibling, and I had a lot of thoughts, but I had no one to share them with. And I think it would have added to the socioeconomic burden of my parents. But I think now looking back, as a single child, I carry the burden of the care and responsibility that comes with my parents as they get older, from medical appointments to buying the new TV, figuring out who the next landscaper is going to be. All that responsibility would fall on me.
I would like to just chime in there, Max. I think as the eldest in our family, Kim and I also feel that burden because the expectation has always been ingrained in us to be that. I don't think our younger siblings feel that pressure, to be honest. I can say for myself, my sister's not even here living in the same place as my parents and I. But if I had an opportunity to take a big job elsewhere, I think I would have to turn that down because I would have that pressure to continue to live close to my parents so that they have that support from the eldest in the family.
I think your moral compass is a lot stronger than mine, Maria. And what I mean by that is, I think for the longest time, shortly after high school, and into most of my early to mid 20s, in certain ways, I did rebel and I did take more of a selfish approach in the sense that, I left to go backpacking and to figure out my rite of passage, mostly because I felt like for all of my adolescence, I had said, yes, mom, yes, dad, if you want me to do X, I will. So I joined all the academic clubs and I studied really hard to get straight A's. And I thought that at the end of that long road, that I would be rewarded with freedom. And I was not met with that reward at the end. So when I finished college and I still wasn't allowed to move out on my own and to seek my own independence with their permission, I did it anyways. And that caused a lot of grief in my family. And in many ways, I think for that point in time, my parents really felt like they had failed as parents. I think what happened was that I saw it as whatever, this is my life. I already paid the tax, so let me reap the benefits. And I left my younger sibling, who is still in the household, still a minor, to deal with those repercussions. Now that I've felt and seen and done all the things that I want to do, my parents and I are a lot closer because I had sought that independence and I had seen what I needed to see and do what I needed to do to feel like I wasn't missing out. So now although I don't live in the same city as my parents, I definitely want to 100% be close by once they get a little bit older, to take care of them. I don't feel the guilt behind it. Like it is my pleasure to now give what they gave me, because rightfully or wrongfully, I sought what I needed to seek in my 20s. Now, what that has left in my family dynamic, I believe, is a lot of that burden early on for my sister, who I think didn't have the same experiences that I did because, again, with my ideology of brute force and seeking the things that I need to seek for myself, she was kind of holding down the home front while I was away. It's a little bit of a different dynamic, but I'm okay now to move into this next era in my life of being the caretaker and being responsible for what isn't any more of a burden to me now, being where I am in life.
The caring era. I do want to ask one thing, which I'm sure some listeners might be curious about is, once you had made that decision to go solo and sort of break away from your parents' way of thinking, the tension that existed in the family, how long did that last? And how did it mend itself?
I think there was tension for 2-3 years where there was a period of time I basically was kind of disowned and cut out of the family. And I felt obviously sad about it, but I also was working on myself. So I sought therapy to understand if what I did was wrong. And obviously, therapy doesn't tell you what you do is wrong or right. But I worked on myself. After I worked on myself, then I realized that I could do the work in mending relationships around myself. I would say that we're still doing it, right? My mom and I have really good conversations now where we can talk very openly with each other. And I never thought in 100 years that we would have gotten to this place. And I would say a little bit has to do with me becoming a mother now. In our last episode, Maria, you also talked about how some of your shared experiences with your mom now is wonderful and has so much more layers and context. Whereas I remember being 17 and saying, "You don't understand me. You don't get it. I'm growing up here in Canada. This isn't the old country. Like, leave me alone."
Would you have redone your life now knowing that you're in a better place with your parents? Like, would you have changed anything?
If I could, if I had the emotional training and in hindsight, I would have tried to do things a little bit more gracefully to relieve my mom and dad that heartache in the time that I was gone, and to a certain extent be a lot more considerate and compassionate with what I was leaving behind in the household for my sibling. I think that's probably my biggest pain point, is having that level of consideration when you're young and the world is about you. It's tough. And I'm just thinking about, as a mother, like, I'm going to probably have to face that with my son one day, where it's going to be very tunnel vision, but at least I now would have that wisdom to give him grace, because my parents didn't have that luxury of also thinking about my feelings. They were trying to put food on the table,
That's the difference, right? Yeah. Is the open communication that I felt like immigrant families never provided as an option on the table. Like, we don't talk about our feelings at the table, right? If you're angry about something, if you disagree about something with the parents, too bad. It is what it is. If they say you got to do this, why are you questioning it? So definitely, I think in our generation, I think we've learned to put communication on the table to be a viable solution to solve problems, whether that be an emotion problem or whatever it is. Good at your job or you're successful. So, long story short, I'm still working on myself.
Would you want your parents to apologize for that mindset that they left with you?
The funny thing is, I've asked my father to apologize to me this one time. I really remember, I think I was in my 20s. I wasn't emotionally stable at that time, and I also just needed some sort of validation from my parents that they recognize I'm feeling these feelings. And I outright asked him to apologize, and he's like, "Why do I need to apologize to you?" So I think, at the end of the day, if we feel these emotions, we just gotta work on it ourselves, either through therapy or talking to close friends like you two, to really feel like you're not alone in the situation. Having that apology from my parents, I don't know if it would make me feel any better, to be honest.
I think I've come to a place where I am happier and understanding of where my parents came from, that I don't need the apology because it's been done in many ways indirectly through actions. So for me to get that apology now, I would almost feel a little bit uncomfortable, feeling ashamed of the fact that, they were trying to do their best. And now I'm putting them in a position where I have to make them grieve their uninformed decisions. I think the best apology is for me to recognize that I don't want to repeat it with my son. And, we don't want to repeat our own traumas. So that's where I am now in terms of that mindset.
Very well said. You're gonna make me cry.
Yeah, I think I think you just have to move forward because unless they had other intentions, they were going off of their gut. They were going off of their own childhood and the way that their parents educated them. And, for families that are not in places of stability, it is very normal for them to ask their child to choose a path of stability. And we all know, those typical immigrant jobs of being an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, accountant, they were all informed by their, your parents' life experiences. And sometimes for them, it's the best thing. For us, as the receivers of those, it may not be. So hopefully for both of you, as your sons grow up, there will be a lot of times where you will have to reflect on your own parenting or being parented experiences. And with better economic times, hopefully some of those things can be avoided.
Your comment on leadership earlier, I never really thought about that, actually. That's a very eloquent resume thing to say. Oh, like exhibited leadership at the age of 4. Thank you very much.
I've been doing this for 30 years prior to the job.
In terms of your leadership as a sibling, did you feel like you had to take more risk in your career? Did you feel that you really successfully changed the views of your parents through the careers that you did? And do you think would your parents share those insights with other parents now that they've gone through it with you?
A loaded question, Max. I think, yeah, being the eldest in the family definitely shaped the way that I perceived myself and the way that I should govern myself. Because, early on, I had responsibilities towards not just myself, but also to my sibling, who was 5 years younger. There were a lot of adulting that happened early on, I would say, which definitely made you grow up faster. And that definitely translates into the corporate world, where I think I have to take on more responsibility than I may probably need to.
Yeah, I would echo that because I remember really early on that responsibility was something that was kind of a given. And it started off even before I had a sibling, because as soon as I could remember, when I was probably 3 or 4, I was learning English. Let that be through my surrounding, my peers and whatnot. And then obviously when I started kindergarten was when I learned more English. But as soon as I learned how to communicate, I all of a sudden became my family's interpreter. And my dad spoke enough English to get by and whatnot, but he worked a lot. So when it was just me and my mom, immediately that was kind of like, okay, you're up on deck. What are they saying? and then I was also doing that with like our neighbors and whatnot. So by the time that my sister came around, it was just kind of a bestowed responsibility on me to kind of encode and decode the messages around me, right? Like if my mom needed help reading a bill, or if we needed to change like telephone services, there I am on the phone. And so I think that at such a young age, knowing that whether I liked it or not, I was kind of first line of defense for these mundane things that go on in life. It was a really big burden that continued to pile up and pile up. And as I got older and the responsibilities got bigger, at some points I would be like, I don't want to do this. This is like so taxing on my body and on my mind, but it's what I've been told to do.
But now that all makes sense on you, who you are. Like you're so eloquently spoken, Kim. Now it makes sense. You're reading utility bills at age 5.
Aren't you so kind? Are you so kind? You know, property taxes and like income taxes.
Exactly.
Check box 47. I'm like, okay, let's flip the page over, people.
And I was also gonna, you're a master cold caller for the same reason. Having to pick up the phone and learn to talk to different people for all sorts of different reasons that you probably didn't understand, except for the weird number on a statement. Uh, those things it's funny when you look back at it, and I'm sure there's tons of, there was a younger listener out there who was an immigrant who's in the same position. Like they would listen to this and say, oh, this might become a career one day. If I'm good enough at taking responsibility for my parents.
I never even saw the parallels that you brought up. And I guess for context for the listeners, what I do is I guess liaise relationships with different investors. And so a lot of the times it is just kind of putting myself out there, talking about what my needs and goals are and just trying to see where it lands. I never thought about that, Max. But you know what? What I do know is I hate calling utilities, CRA, phone plans, and whatnot now. That all of that falls on my husband. Sometimes he'll be like, "Can you call to cancel this credit card?" And I'd be like, "No, why must you do this to me? Why must you forsake me?"
It's a traumatic experience.
And he's just like, "Okay, why are you so dramatic? Fine." And anytime that any credit card company allows me to cancel online with like a button, if it's through a bank, I'm like, thank the Lord.
The virtual chatbots are made for folks like you.
Max, do you think you exert some leadership early on in your age as well? Being a single child at home, I would think, having immigrant parents having to rely on you for certain things too. Did you feel that?
I definitely resonate with Kim's comment. I mean, it's not, no story is the same, and I, would caution that the experiences, while there are some parallels, it's not monolithic in terms of every immigrant kid grows up to feel this way. But I think it's part of being young to the country, new to the country. You are the first and most fluent speaker of a language, and broadly in Asian families, there's a duty to help each other. There's a duty to your parents. There's a duty to see that your parents' hardship is everyone's hardship. And so that puts us in positions where we have to take on those things. I for sure hated cold calling, or not cold calling, but rather calling up random people and talking to strangers. In some degree, Zoom makes it easier. But those days, the old telephones, choppy sound quality, you really had to get it right the first time around. You couldn't judge emotions, and being a shy kid, that was probably the toughest thing for me. Just being very assertive about, this is why I'm calling, the problem. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm just trying to help my parents. So with that practice, it helped put away a lot of the shyness that I used to have. But still, like, I don't know if it was a positive or bad experience. It was just an experience that came with growing up here as an immigrant child.
What an interesting alternative to like say Montessori or something, eh?
Yeah.
These types of activities.
This is real life practice.
Yeah.
There's no simulation as you would get in school. This is real life problem solving 101.
And you know what? Like it wasn't just isolated to me, this request. Obviously, when my sister got older and say if I wasn't around, or maybe there were like two things that needed to be handled, maybe we divided and conquered. But what I do know is that we both didn't like doing it, but there was no way out of doing it. And I think to a certain extent, because maybe I had more experience, just like because of more time doing it, that I ended up getting the work done. Let that be A, because of more time and experience, or B, because if one wasn't going to do it, the other had to. And so I ended up being the bottom line for a lot of these things. And what I think happened was that then I was seen kind of like the person with the better track record of getting things done, which is an erroneous conclusion, right? I mean, like, we're very well capable of communicating and fixing phone plans and whatnot. But because of little things like that, I think it added up over time. So that coupled with maybe being the elder sibling made my parents feel like they could put more trust on things on me. I don't know, like I guess that makes sense, but I can only imagine how it would have made my sibling feel. Like maybe she's like, okay, great, yeah, we'll unload it all on her. Or maybe there was a sense of why aren't I regarded with that level of trust? Is that the right word? Or what's the word I'm looking for other than track record?
Well, track record makes it seem like a job. Like the better you do, the more work we give you. So
Like the better, like more efficacy, I guess, in terms of what they were asking of me. And I've been thinking more and more about that as I've gotten older, because now we're not needed in that same way, you know. And because I'm an adult now and I'm a parent now, I can understand where they were coming from. And those were just kind of fundamentals that they needed done. And they, if they could have, they would have done it themselves. I don't think that they did it out of like sheer torture. It's because they needed help.
100%.
Yeah, because they needed help. And so I can empathize with that now. But I can only imagine how that has inadvertently shaped the way that we viewed our parents, how I viewed them and how my sister viewed them, how that would have made us feel. Again, you know, like I think I worked through a lot of things over the years. And like I said, you know, now I have this like weird phobia of having to get on the phone to complain. You know, I'll be like, I'll just pay the erroneous charge. Like I don't want to talk to anyone.
Well, here's a weird question. Who is the trustee that your parents have put on their will? Is it yourself? Because it is me in my family and my husband for his family, which basically means our parents trust elder sibling in the family to take care of matters after they pass. So there it is. It explains it.
I don't know if there's a designated trustee, but I would imagine that when time comes that I would probably take on that role as well, just because I've gone through the document and I've looked at it and I've asked questions. And yeah, I probably would be asked to look over those things.
Now, just bouncing off your other comment, Kim, did you ever feel good after you helped your parents?
I think overall, when it was successful, I felt good. I also felt really bad when I couldn't get things done or it was a dead end call. And it wasn't always met with, oh, you tried. It was more so like, why didn't you get that right? which which was like, then I had to self-reflect to be like, what was my strategy? Like, how could I have changed for next time? You know? And it was completely out of my control. I'm like, okay, I mean, I couldn't get the rate changed, or I couldn't, whatever it was.
And Maria, have you ever been in a situation where perhaps you saw your younger sibling go through something that you thought you could have navigated it better?
Good question. Well, I don't want to put my sister on blast, but she moved to a different country during COVID. And to her defense, she wanted a different career path. She wanted to try something different. She was tired of living in Toronto, doing the same thing. And, you know, good for her for taking a chance and taking a leap of faith. I honestly would have never done that, or would have never thought I had the opportunity or the approval from my parents to do that as the eldest in the family. And I think, you know, for her to do it and my parents be okay with it kind of solidifies, you know, that maybe I've paved the path enough for her to be brave enough to speak up. I think she did a great she had did you know, she made a great decision to take a chance to go to the new country to take on a bigger role for herself at a larger company. But during that entire process, I don't think she planned it very well, meaning that she didn't foresee the longer future and planned out, not is she just moving there for the year, but what's she going to do for the next 3 to 5 years, right? Like at some point, you want to be closer to family, and maybe when you're young, you don't really put that perspective into place. But yeah, it's an interesting question, Max. I think everyone have different experiences and different stages in their life that they want to capitalize on. But being the eldest in the family, going back to that concept of duty, having that concept of responsibility. My mindset is that I have to, or I feel like I have an obligation to be physically near my parents, especially as they age.
Have you ever been in a situation where, because you were going through that situation, because your parents asked you to be part of that situation, you actually took a lot from it and that really pushed you to grow as a child? Not everybody has something positive to come out of their childhood experiences. Like Kim, you just mentioned, like, not all of those calls that you made were happy times, right? They were challenging for you as they would be challenging for your parents, but you were the one that was put up to the task of doing so. So, I really, what I was trying to get to is, putting a more positive spin, as the eldest sibling, was there something good that you took out of this experience? Did it push you to grow now that you look back at it? Or did you like just hate every one of your experiences and dreaded it so much?
Right. Well, what I can offer from that question of yours is that not just unique to me and my sibling, but from other peers who have similar experiences. I I think that it really shows what kind of personality each sibling has when one is thrown in a situation like this. So parents ask us to do X, then we execute whichever strategy we see fit, right? Because all they want is results. And I think some of it for me personally is just through my own personality. And I like ambiguity. I can say that now because of all the, resume writing and interviews that I've done over the years. But as a kid, I wouldn't have been able to identify this. But what I did like is when it was positive and the outcome was good, I liked the fact that it was kind of like a puzzle. For example, I remember my mom needing minor surgery on something. I can't remember now, but she had some questions, she had some concerns. And so, I looked up what these words were in English because I had no idea what they were. I knew what it was in Vietnamese. And so I had to ask questions about certain body parts, certain functions, and whatnot. And long story short, we were able to get through all of it, answer all her questions. She came out fine. And I felt like I built on some new vocabulary. But I can imagine for not just my own sibling, but other siblings, not just younger, but sometimes older, right? Who would have these types of conversations with me. We recall on these memories. And some of them were like, it was so detrimental to my being. I would be called, they would say I would be called names, or be like, I would be faulted for not remembering certain things, or not knowing certain things. And how could I have known? How could I have known? Because I wasn't trained to, as like a 10-year-old, to know these things. I think there are even memes on the internet or videos, right? Joke videos about parents being like, can you log into my Facebook? And you'd be like, well, what's your email that you use? They're like, I don't know. Oh, what's your passcode? I don't know. Well, then how am I supposed to log you in? Well, you're supposed to know these things. Like, didn't you go to school? And obviously it's a joke, right? But it does feel like that most of the time. And again, if we're really trying to feel for our parents, I think it was just like so much frustration on their end in a world where they don't understand, coupled with technology. And then here we are seen as kind of, in a certain way, as like saviors to the family because we're born into this society and we're supposed to have the education at school, which they have no idea about. They just know that once we meet the finish line that we should be self-sufficient adults. So short answer was, I learned whenever I could because I liked it and because that was my personality. But I can definitely feel for people who didn't share the same type of ideology and personality as me, and especially someone who is genuinely an introvert. Like, I can only imagine how painful that could have been.
As an introvert, I would say it's painful, but it was as an only child, there was no really other option. You made a great reflection about sort of navigating the healthcare system, as that person crutch to your parents. And along the way, you learn some really interesting things, and they form stories. There's stories that I would probably tell today, but certainly growing up, I couldn't. It was probably the most embarrassing thing. When other parents could always attend PTA meetings, and and they could always communicate with teachers, and I couldn't. And my parents were really interested because they couldn't. It wasn't a pleasant thing to experience as a child, but now once as you get older, you get more mature, you see the world in a different way. And I am happy to tell those stories as similar to you, Kim, about those things as a kid.
So we talked a lot about how all of these pressures that were put on us over the years growing up has informed the way that we have built out our careers and have fallen into the professions that we're in now. If you had to look back and self-reflect, if things were different in your childhood, let that be maybe because of sibling order, maybe because of the pressures and the leadership requirements that were forced upon us at such a young age, would your career path have changed? And what would you be doing now? Have you ever thought about that if you could and there were no barriers and no measuring stick from your family? What would young Max and young Maria be doing now?
I think I'd be doing the same thing. I think I would have just gotten here in a different path. And that different path may not have led me here quite as quickly due to those pressures and expectations from my parents. But needless to say, I think I would still end up as, an asset manager in real estate. I truly love what I do. So I would have found my way here one way or another. I maybe would have branched out into interior designing a little bit, but I think growing up in an Asian household, it was pretty clear at the beginning when you're growing up that your parents would inform you on which careers made money and which ones didn't. So they would have really educated you on that. So yeah, I think I would have ended up in the same place.
No, not
about you, Max?
actor, not dancer, not writer.
No, never
No?
had those ambitions, to be honest. I was not really interested in any of that. I am interested in making money though, so
Interesting. Interesting. The money, the common factor. What about you, Max?
In many ways, I'm grateful for my parents for choosing and really pushing and recommending the path that I took. For them, it was always about, what recommendation could we give Max that would give him the most choice later on to pivot if he needed to. And for them, that was accounting. And they felt that, for a kid who was as stubborn as he is, not the brightest in the class, accounting would be the best path. And, because of that, I've been able to pivot, to do all sorts of things and use that as a leg up to get into the door for many different industries. So to Maria's point, I really do agree with it. I think once you find the industry that you love, it was always meant to be. And I think along the way, perhaps my parents' guidance, settled me a little bit sooner than I would have otherwise. I might have been a crazy failing scientist had I gone my own way in high school. So, but I'm grateful I didn't go down that path.
That's so interesting,
and made no money.
I mean, what you said earlier, Maria, about how our parents do inform us on a lot of the ways that we think now, right? Because they're our first influencers. Unless we had different parents altogether, I do agree partly that we'd probably get to a very similar ending. It's just the path would be maybe different. And I do agree that for whatever it is that I ended up doing and choosing, each and every one of my decisions were guided with financial freedom. I don't think that is a negative thing to say because I wanted as much choice and flexibility in life if things were to happen, and if I had that security blanket, I could always go into, I don't know, like vocational music making or something like that. But I think we all kind of share the same thread there, which is finding that independence, and financial stability is a very, very important piece of that. I don't know what I would be, actually. I had so many interests as a kid. I do know that I really enjoyed stories, writing stories, building narratives. And if I really had to stretch it, like in an interview, I think what I do now is kind of that. When I talk to clients and when I talk about our products, it's a narrative that I build, because you can't necessarily show something to someone and ask them to buy it if they don't feel like it fits in their world. So I suppose I did find a way to insert that into my job now.
Very well said.
How have we defined happiness now? Or how would you reflect on what happiness means to you now? I don't think we have it as tough as the artist or those who have life paths that are not as easily deciphered as ours. And maybe that's because we made those choices subconsciously through duty, through burden, through trying to get through the family mantra. So for myself, I'm still working through what happiness means to me. I think about Beyonce's Pretty Hurts. And I think she says that in the song, I think it's along the lines of like, how do you see success or whatnot? And she says that I want to be happy. And I think about that sometimes. What does that mean? I'm curious to know how you define that.
Yeah, I think we all three of us work in a corporate job, right? And that comes with a heavy mental load. And we pay for that success through that often. For me now, I think the definition of success is trying to find a better life and work balance, because historically our parents never had that. They had to prioritize work to get food on the table, to put a roof over our heads. So that life balance piece was never there. But now we're all three of us are in a better financial position. We can think about that other component of happiness. But in order for us to continue to be to benefit from the success, the money that we all make, we got to pay for it through our jobs and the pressures that we face through our jobs. So unless we want to give up our lifestyle, I'm not sure how we can all come to a middle ground to find that happiness that we all try to achieve. Like, I would love to have 5 weeks of vacation and actually take a vacation where I can turn off my phone, read a book on the beach, right, for a good 2 weeks. But my job doesn't entail that. So, but then I can't afford that beach vacation if I don't do my current job. So it's really hard.
For me, it's about dismantling some of the barriers that I faced because of where I lived and because of how I lived. I think of all the new immigrants that come to the country, and many of them are still facing the same barriers I had, and I wish they didn't. My definition of happiness is, yes, you have to work, you have to put food on the table, you have to make sure your parents on both sides are remain healthy and happy. But beyond that, whatever ounce of time I have to do other things, I will dedicate that to try to make sure those challenges and barriers, because of someone's socioeconomic situation, get dismantled. And a lot of my work dedicated into Scarborough, and where I grew up in Scarborough here in Toronto. And so, yeah, any efforts I can make in that direction, I would find to be a happy day. And yeah, I encourage everyone to do more when they can.
I'm still working on it. One of the things that I want to do better at is understanding that bringing happiness to my family, to my loved ones, does not necessarily mean gifts, does not necessarily mean things that I could buy with money, because for so long, that's how I defined success. So what I would like to work on is experiences with those that I love, so that we can hang on to that once the gifts are used. So I think this has been a fruitful conversation. It's uncovered quite a bit of interesting takes that influence who we are as people and as corporate workers. So with that, I think it's a wrap. Minor Things is an original podcast and can be found on YouTube and Spotify. Music credits to Soundstripe. Follow Minor Things Podcast, all one word, on Instagram and provide feedback. We'd love to hear from you. My name is Kim, and I'm on mat leave and currently... Oh, fuck. What was my tagline?